Happy New Year. Welcome back to Bracket Science. Hope everyone had a great and safe New Year's weekend. A lot went on in the college basketball world over the New Year's weekend. I know it was kind of dominated by college football. There were a lot of big basketball games going on, especially in the Pac-12. Couple upsets, we'll get into those here. We also updated our bracketology, so in this episode we are going to talk a little bit about some of the big risers and some of the big fallers that occurred this weekend going into our bracketology. We'll also talk about get more in depth on some of those followers, including our worry wart meter, where we rank how worried we are about some of these specific teams. And then we will talk about Terrence Shannon and Illinois. We got into it briefly in our last episode about that situation going over there. For those who don't know, he was charged with rape. And he is obviously one of the best players in college basketball. As the season ended right now, he would be an All-American. This is going to change Illinois' season by a lot. They are currently top 10 in the AP poll. The AP poll was just released, but this will without a doubt be a blow to Illinois' season. We'll get into that just a little bit. But first, let's start with some of the results, some of the New Year's weekend games. A lot of upsets. All right, let's just go in chronological order here. We'll start with Friday. A couple notable games on Friday. San Diego State was visiting the then number 13 team in the nation, Gonzaga Bulldogs. And San Diego State went in there and beat them 84-74, picking up a big win. Gonzaga now 9-4 on the year, and they have 0 quad one wins. Rough start for Mark Few's squad here. They now have losses to Purdue, UConn, Washington, and now the San Diego State loss. We thought they may have some quality wins earlier in the year. They beat UCLA in Maui, and they beat USC. Both teams are now sub 500 on the year. Those wins are not aging well. The WCC, Gonzaga's conference, they have a great chance to just be a one big bid league this year. We've seen them in the past years with St. Mary's and Gonzaga both get into the tournament. But as of right now, San Francisco is actually the highest rated team in the WCC in the net right now. It seems to be a three-race team between San Francisco, Gonzaga, and St. Mary's. San Francisco has been solid. Gonzaga and St. Mary's disappointing by their standards. Great win for San Diego State here. Tough loss for Gonzaga. Gonzaga kind of near the bubble line as of now. We still expect them to win the WCC. We'll see how they do going forward against teams like San Francisco and St. Mary's. Let's move through these a little bit quickly. Let's move on to our next game. McNeese visited Michigan, and McNeese beat them 87-76. Michigan now sub 500 as well, joining USC and UCLA after this loss to McNeese. McNeese is very good. They are 11-2 on the year right now. Could be one of those teams come March that's heavily picked upset team, kind of like how Furman was last year against Virginia. We have McNeese as a 13 seed right now in our newest bracketology, just like Furman was last year. They should win the Southland with ease. They might even go undefeated in it. Honestly, the Southland is very weak, and McNeese is very good. They're very good at KenPom. They're very good by all the computers. Watch out for this McNeese team. They're very solid. Another Pac-12 matchup worth noting, Washington 69 at Colorado. Colorado beat them by 4, scoring 73-69 Colorado. This game's worth noting. It's a big Pac-12 matchup. Both teams near the bubble for our bracketology, but Colorado was able to hand off Washington 73-69. Let's move on to the day we want to talk about, and that is Saturday. Starting with the noon game that was flying under the radar because it shouldn't have been a good game. It was Virginia visiting Notre Dame, a very bad Notre Dame team. A lot of talk about Notre Dame's squad and how bad they have been this year. And Notre Dame beat them 76-54. Absolute blowout. Game was not close. Virginia was actually favored by 10.5 going in and just got killed, just got demolished by Notre Dame. Notre Dame came into the game 5-7. Their previous 2 games, they beat Marist at home by 4. Marist came into Notre Dame, and Notre Dame was only able to win that game by 4. And then Notre Dame had that home loss against the Citadel by 20. This team did not come in well, and they just blew out Virginia. It's a great win for Notre Dame, but I mean, we have to talk about Virginia a little bit. It's just so ugly to watch this team play when their offense is not playing well. They were just 38% from the field in this game and went 2 for 11 from 3. They now have 3 losses on the year. They were by 24 to Wisconsin, by 23 at Memphis, and now by 22 at Notre Dame. When they are not scoring the ball, they are getting blown out on the regular. Their best wins have come against Texas A&M at home, which is going to carry them as of right now. They beat Syracuse at home as well, and they had that neutral site game earlier in the year against Florida. Solid wins, kind of evens out with the blowouts. We have them as an 11 seed right now. Virginia slowly moving down, though, but these wins are good enough as of right now. Let's look at a couple other ACC matchups that went on. Pitt visited Syracuse, and Syracuse beat them 81-73. Both teams came into the game 9-3 and are both on the bubble. It was a pick'em game. It was a good basketball game. Syracuse was able to win the game. Another ACC matchup was Virginia Tech visiting Wake Forest. Wake Forest beat them 86-63. Absolute blowout. Both teams are near the bubble. We had Virginia Tech as one of our first four out, and Wake Forest as one of the teams considered, but not quite yet on the bubble. This will change after this win. We'll discuss this in a little bit. But the game of the day came out of the Big East. It was number 22 Creighton visiting number 10 Marquette. Marquette was able to win the game 72-67. Both of these teams were picked in the top three of the Big East. But Marquette was able to hold them off and move to 2-1 in the Big East, while Creighton now drops to 0-2 on the year in the Big East. With this win, Marquette tied the Big East record of 20 straight conference home wins. Very impressive there. Congrats to Shaka Smart and their squad. Sean Jones was huge off the bench for Marquette, scoring 15 points to match Tyler Kolek as the team's leading scorer. Great game by Sean Jones. He was 5 for 8 from the field, 3 for 5 for 3, and he's not a very good three-point shooter for those who know Marquette, but he provided a much-needed spark off the bench. Creighton was actually up at the half, and Sean Jones was a key role in bringing Marquette back in the second half. Creighton just can't seem to buy a break right now. They're 9-4 on the year. They're definitely going to actually, they did drop out of the top 25 that was released earlier today. I think they're 27th currently. Baylor Shireman looked great. He had a big night for Creighton. He had 23 points, 7 3-pointers. He looks really good. He's playing at an All-American level. His shot is so beautiful, so pure. Ryan Kalkbrenner was the story for Creighton, though. He was non-existent. He's one of their most important players, averaging over 18 points a game. He scored only 8 points and 3 rebounds. Rough game for him. Oso Ighodaro just held him. Creighton's best wins this year have come against Nebraska, at Nebraska, and then they beat Alabama by 3 at home at Creighton. Decent wins. That Nebraska one's getting better and better, it seems. But, I mean, they killed Nebraska. They beat them by 29. And Alabama, we know how good they are. I still think Creighton is good, but they need to prove themselves in the Big East. They can't be a bottom of the Big East team and expect to get an at-large bid. They get a chance to redeem themselves at Georgetown on Tuesday against Ed Cooley and Georgetown. They should win this game, but you can't take anyone lightly in the Big East, especially at home. Marquette, they travel to Seton Hall on Saturday for a good Big East matchup there. We saw what Seton Hall did to UConn at home, so we'll see how Marquette fares at Seton Hall. Another game that we just have to talk about that was not expected even in the slightest bit. Number 7, Florida Atlantic, coming off that win against Arizona, that huge win in the game of the year, visited Florida Gulf Coast. And this is not the Dunk City Florida Gulf Coast team. This team is not good. And Florida Gulf Coast beat them 72-68. It was one of those games I did not plan on watching. I turned it on in the second half because I saw Florida Atlantic was down 9 at the half. Florida Gulf Coast is just not very good either. Florida Gulf Coast came in 5-9, and only 2 of their wins were over Division I opponents, and one of them was Georgia Southern, who is 1-12 on the year. And the other one was FIU, who's 5-10 on the year, and we saw Florida Atlantic just destroy FIU. No one could have really seen this one coming. It just looked like Florida Atlantic just went into this game, didn't want to be there, already written off Florida Gulf Coast before going into the new year, into conference play. It was just ugly to watch. Elijah Martin, a very solid player for Florida Atlantic. He had a big 3 at the end of the game, some of the game that I watched. It was wide open in the corner, and he just clanked it off the side of the backboard. It just was a symbolic of this game for Florida Atlantic. They suffered that loss earlier in the year to Bryant, but then we all thought they were back. They climbed all the way up to number 7 in the AP poll. So they had quality wins. We talked about that win over Arizona. They beat Texas A&M on a neutral. They beat Butler by 30. They beat Liberty by more than that. I think it was 35. They killed Virginia Tech. They beat Charleston. They lost that game to Illinois, but we know how good Illinois has become. Very interesting resume for FAU. FAU needs to just start understanding is they were a Final Four team last year. And with being one of the best teams in the nation, it adds the urge for these other teams to want to beat them even more. Teams want to beat a previous Final Four team. Florida Atlantic probably didn't circle Florida Gulf Coast on the schedule this year. They probably circled Arizona. They circled Memphis. They're circling all their big games. Florida Gulf Coast certainly circled them, and it showed in this game. FAU now 2 quad 4 losses with this Florida Gulf Coast win, or Florida Gulf Coast loss, and that Bryant loss earlier in the year. Their wins over Arizona and Texas A&M will carry them to an at-large bid no matter what happens in AAC play. They're not a bubble team as of now. They've beaten some of the best teams in the nation. But very interesting what is going on at Florida Atlantic. We'll see how they do come March if they can have another run just like they did last year. Let's talk quickly about some other games that are worth noting on Saturday. Indiana State visited Michigan State, and this was a very good game, but Michigan State won 87-75. Indiana State, I see them as 50-50 with Drake in the Missouri Valley Conference. I would lean more towards Indiana State. Michigan State is now 8-5 on the year and now have won 4 in a row. Tom Izzo's squad starting to finally get back. We'll talk more about them later in some of our risers in bracketology. Liberty visited Alabama. Liberty should win Conference USA, no problem, and Alabama just dismantled them, 101-56. This gave Alabama some much-needed momentum coming to the SEC play. Watch out for Alabama. They've played a lot of close games. This team can score the ball. 101 points against a good Liberty squad. Great win for the Crimson Tide there. Ohio State beat West Virginia in overtime, 78-75, and we know they blew that lead earlier in the year against Penn State. They almost blew it again here against West Virginia. Not a very good West Virginia team either. But Ohio State was able to hold them off for a much-needed win. And then Lipscomb, out of the A-Sun, some notable teams in that conference also include teams like Kennesaw State. Kennesaw State won it last year. Lipscomb may be the favorite in the A-Sun right now. They beat Florida State at home, at Florida State, 78-75 as well, just like that Ohio State-West Virginia game, 78-75. Good win there for Lipscomb over Florida State. Florida State, very interesting team this year. They beat Colorado earlier in the year. Now they're losing to Lipscomb at home. Pretty rough. Let's move on to Sunday. Only one game that we just have to talk about that no one saw this one coming. Arizona visited Stanford. Arizona being the number 4 team in the country, and Stanford beat them 100-82. Unfortunately, no one could really watch this game because it was on the Pac-12 network, and that's a whole other story. For those who don't know, if you do not live basically in Washington, Oregon, California, you cannot watch the Pac-12 network. It is a horrible network. It's got to be some of the reason why this conference is just collapsing in general. They are getting overtaken. It is just not run well. Could not watch this game. Everyone looking on their phone, seeing Stanford is beating the number 4 team in the country, and no one is able to watch it. They don't even accept YouTube TV, which it seems just about everyone has anymore. I hate the Pac-12 network. That's my rant. Let's keep talking about it. Arizona came into the game second in the nation at KenPom in defensive efficiency, and they gave up 100 points to Stanford, who came in just 5-6 on the year. We thought Arizona would absolutely run through the Pac-12, but it just shows on the road nobody is a given win. I'm not going to talk much about this game because, as I said, didn't get to watch it because of this Pac-12 network. But props to Stanford, 100 points. That is just an electric shooting performance over Arizona. Arizona now lost 2 of their last 3. I think they lost that FAU game. I think they beat someone in between there. I think it was a Pac-12 school. And then now this loss at Stanford could hurt their chances of being a 1 seed come later in the year, but we'll see how they do going forward. Another Pac-12 matchup was going on. 2 teams worth noting. It was Washington visiting Utah, and Utah won the game 95-90. Washington actually had a 10-point lead at the half. Utah ended up winning this game 95-90. Good win for the Utes there. Good week for the Pac-12. If only anyone could watch the game on the Pac-12 network. All right, I'm done talking about the Pac-12 network. But as promised, we said we were going to talk about some of the risers and fallers in our bracketology. We'll get into that right here, right after a quick break. All right, let's start with some of our risers. Let's start in the Big Ten with Michigan State. We moved them from our first four in as an 11 seed in that first four game to a 9 seed now with this win over Indiana State. I like what Tom Izzo's squad's doing over there, as we noted earlier. 4-0 in their last four games. They're starting to finally figure things out. A couple of key wins. This win over Indiana State is a very good win. I have them now comfortably in the tournament at a 9 seed. Let's talk about Syracuse. Syracuse, one of our risers. We had them in our next four out. One of the last teams in our next four out, so maybe 11 teams out. They moved into now just our first four out with this win over Pitt. Essentially flip-flopped with Pitt. We'll talk to Pitt a little bit once we come with the fallers. Let's talk about San Diego State, though. That win at Gonzaga was huge. We moved them from a 9 seed all the way up to a 5 seed, and we remember what they did last year as a 5 seed, making the national championship game. I like what I'm seeing out of San Diego State. Good win at Gonzaga. Once again, we'll talk in the fallers a little bit about Gonzaga. Let's talk about Oregon. Oregon was in our considered teams to make the tournament as of last week to now in our first four, all the way from kind of considered to in our first four after those wins over USC and UCLA. Good Pac-12 wins, close games. We'll see how they do once they take on the elites like Arizona and even Colorado. Speaking of Colorado, we moved them from our first four out to now having one of our last four byes in our bracketology after wins over Washington and Washington State. Rough week for Washington and Washington State. We'll talk about them here in a little bit. Alabama, we moved them from one of our last four byes all the way up to an 8 seed after beating Eastern Kentucky and then just that domination of Liberty. Alabama has quality losses. They're now starting to pick up kind of some quality wins, especially this one over Liberty by 45 points. We have them all the way up to an 8 seed just above Michigan State. Another team that beat Washington State and Washington, our next riser is the Utah. We moved them just strictly from an 8 seed to a 7 seed after beating these two teams. Rough week for Washington State and Washington. Let's just talk a little bit about Marquette. Marquette moved up just basically one spot, but this was enough to be noted because it moves them from a 2 seed to our final 1 seed with this win over Creighton and Arizona's loss, dropping Arizona a little bit. Marquette, it was between Marquette and it was between UConn, both Big East teams. I think Marquette just has some more quality wins. Marquette has one more loss, but I think just beating Kansas, now beating Creighton. Yes, they've suffered those losses to Wisconsin and Providence. I still have them as a 1 seed now, just a little bit of a better resume than UConn. Now let's get a little bit negative here and talk about the falls. Let's talk about Arizona. As we just noted, we just dropped them just to a 2 seed, moved Marquette up after that loss at Stanford. I still expect Arizona to run through the Pac-12, but we'll see. They're not a 1 seed as of now with 2 losses in their last 3 games. One of those losses came to FAU, who is our next faller, and they fell from a 3 seed to a 6 seed. They deserve to drop at least 3 seeds after a loss at Florida Gulf Coast. As we said earlier, their second quad 4 loss. Still have them as a 6 seed. Last year they were a 9 seed when they made the Final Four. Next up, Gonzaga. Gonzaga from a 6 seed to a 10 seed with that loss against San Diego State. Still have them as the automatic qualifier out of the WCC. This is a team that does not have a quad 1 win, as we talked about earlier. They are not deserving of anything better than a double-digit seed as of right now. Virginia, another team that will be moving to a double-digit seed. We moved them from a 7 seed to an 11 seed, and now one of the last 4 byes with this loss at Notre Dame. Tony Bennett's squad needs to figure out a way to get some offense going over there. Creighton, they moved from a 6 seed to an 8 seed with that loss at Marquette. Creighton, quite frankly, does not have some of the greatest wins. They have that win over Alabama. They haven't looked great. I still think this is a tournament team and a team that no one will want to play come March. We know how talented they are. Now let's talk about the team Syracuse beat. And our next faller is Pitt. Pitt moved from our first four out to kind of considered, unfortunately, not even in our next four out. They're just kind of considered with that loss at Syracuse. Pitt, quite frankly, hasn't beaten anybody yet. They beat Missouri, is probably their best win, which is okay. Missouri isn't great. They're also in our kind of considered. But Pitt, that game against Syracuse was huge, and they just kind of flip-flopped with Syracuse in terms of the bubble. Next, let's talk about Washington. This was a tough one because we had them in our first four games to now our first four out as they suffered two losses. It was two road games and they kept it close, which is why they only drop a little bit. They lost at Colorado and then at Utah. They should have won that Utah game and then kind of choked a second half lead. Kind of rough for Washington. Let's talk about Washington State. Washington State also went 0-2 on the week. We moved them from our kind of considered to just not even considered at all right now. Washington State, they're going to have some serious work to do in the Pac-12. I was kind of hopeful for this team. They got off to a good start this year, but not right now. Not in the bubble conversation as of right now. Finally, our last team that we'll be negative on, Virginia Tech. They moved from our first four out to barely even considered after that loss at Wake Forest. Virginia Tech, quite frankly, hasn't beaten anyone too great. They've suffered some okay losses. This loss at Wake Forest is a little concerning. They lost by 23. They are all the way down to kind of considered just on that team, just on your notes where it's like, yeah, maybe. That's some of our risers and fallers of bracketology. We're going to talk about some more of these fallers, talking about our worry wart meter. On a scale of 1 to 100, how worried are we about these teams? Alrighty, our first team we're going to talk about on our worry wart meter, the first team we're going to rank is Virginia, Tony Bennett's squad. Right now, we are 80% worried about this team. I think they do end up in the NCAA tournament, but I just don't think I see them winning a game in the NCAA tournament. We know how good they are in the ACC every year. Tony Bennett is such a good coach that I think they still make it to the big dance. But once a team has some amped up energy and plays any sort of defense against them in March Madness, which you will definitely get, then this team just quite frankly cannot score the basketball. I am 80% worried about Virginia. We'll see how Tony Bennett can figure out this squad. Next, let's talk about Creighton. Creighton, I am only 30% worried about, less worried than I am worried about the Creighton Blue Jays. They've lost some questionable games, but I still believe they have all the pieces there. Thing that scares me about Creighton is how reliant they are on the three-point ball. Baylor Shireman is a star. He's looked better and better. I still believe they will be in the top 3 or 4 of Big East play, even with starting off 0-2. We have them as an 8 seed in our bracketology right now, but I think they'll grab anywhere between a 3 and 6 seed by the end of the year. I trust that this team will figure it out with how much experience they have, how much talent they have, how much size they have. I'm not too worried about Creighton, but maybe just a little bit. We'll give them a 30% worried. Florida Atlantic, also 30% worried. I'm worried for this team in conference play because obviously they just look past their weak opponents. I'm not worried for them come March Madness. They know how to do it. They made the Final Four last year. They're very talented. When they play the best they can, they're one of the best teams in the nation. We saw that against Arizona, but it's just these games against the Florida Gulf Coast, the Bryants. Who knows what they'll do when they get into AAC play, when they play some of the weaker competition. I love this FAU team. I think they're so talented. I think they could be a national champion, but they gotta figure something out over there. I'm 30% worried about them. Next, let's talk about Arizona, and I am only 5% worried about them. This might tickle the people the wrong way a little bit. I just think the talent is there. It's just a matter of winning the big games. Not going to discuss that much on this Arizona team against Stanford. As I said, I really didn't get to watch it because of that freaking Pac-12 network that I just keep bringing up and keep bringing up. But anyways, maybe if I'd have watched the game, I'd have felt a little bit worse about them, but I don't. I just think that they are so talented. They're so big. Every time I see them, their size just amazes me. It's weird to me that this team ever loses a game, but that's just how it goes. That's how crazy college basketball is. That's why it's the best sport on the planet. I'm only 5% worried about Arizona. I still got a good feeling about them. Next, let's talk about Mark Few's squad in Gonzaga. I am 70% worried about this team. I just think this team is quite frankly just not that good. We kind of figured this might they wouldn't be as good as last year, losing Drew Timmy and Jalen Strother, two best players. But you just never expect to see Gonzaga 9-4 after non-conference play. As we said earlier, the WCC is just okay. We've seen St. Mary's struggle early. San Francisco's been all right. Gonzaga should still win it, I would think. I still think St. Mary's has a lot of talent, and I like San Francisco, what they're doing over there. Got a great coach. I just worry come March how Gonzaga will compete against teams who are just, quite frankly, just better and bigger and just more talented teams than them. We'll see how they do. Mark Few's a great coach. He may get them together come March, but I am 70% worried about Gonzaga right now. Now let's talk about Illinois. I know Illinois didn't play. Actually, they played one game. They played some nonsense opponent, I think, and beat them by 30 or something. But we just got to talk about the Terrence Shannon stuff. As much as I hate talking about it, it is newsworthy. He is a important piece. I'll give them a 55% worried on the worry meter right now. A little bit more worried than not worried, just because of how big of a player he had become, how big of a star, quite frankly, he had become. Let's just talk about it a little bit. We don't have much more information on the Terrence Shannon incident. We do know the incident took place in a bar in Lawrence, Kansas. As a basketball podcast, what we do know is once you're charged with rape, you probably aren't returning to the floor anytime that year. Hopefully justice is served in this case. Hopefully, I'm not going to try and talk for the judicial system. I just know basketball. I don't know about the judicial system. As a basketball podcast, let's just try and talk about a little bit more of just how this will affect the basketball team, how it'll affect March Madness, instead of acting like I know anything about the judicial system. Hopefully justice is served. That's all I got to say. Let's move forward. Terrence Shannon was without a doubt Illinois' most important player, and he was, as we said earlier, probably en route to an All-American season. He was having a great year. With this being said, a lot of people have been saying Illinois may be on upset alert come March because of how heavily they rely on Terrence Shannon, which I didn't really believe, but now obviously they can't rely on Terrence Shannon, so we'll see how this changes things. Illinois still has a very talented team. They got Marcus Domask, who came out against FAU, had a huge night. Coleman Hawkins is a great big man. He runs the floor well. He's not that big, but he can bring the ball up. He's a very valuable piece. They got Dane Danger. He's a massive body down low. Ty Rogers, Quincy Guerrier, and Luke Goody. They have a solid team. They got a lot of talent on this roster. They'll have to adapt their style, obviously, a lot with losing their best player. They're in the top 10 right now of the AP poll, and they're going to have to work even harder, work more as a team to continue this flow going forward. I still like Illinois. I think Underwood will get them going. Maybe we'll see another star come out in Marcus Domask. Coleman Hawkins has already been great this year. I'm excited to see how this team will move going forward without playing just relying on Terrence Shannon. Final teams we're going to talk about are just all grouped together. We talked about them briefly earlier in the show. USC, UCLA, and Michigan. All three teams 6-7 on the year. I am 100% worried about all of these teams. All of these teams are going to have to win their conference tourney to make the tournament unless they were to go 18-2 in their conference or something stupid. USC is just the one that it's just mind-boggling to me. This team has such good guard play. Isaiah Collier has been very disappointing. He turns the ball over so much, but still he gets to the rim so well. Bronny James has actually been better than I expected him to be. Quite frankly, it's amazing he's even playing out here, and he's been playing well. He had 15 points last game off the bench. He's looked pretty well. They have Boogie Ellis. It's weird that this team is not winning. Something's got to change over there. I'm not sure what it is. Can't watch a lot of games because of the Pac-12 network. All right, that was the last one, I promise. But anyways, they should be winning. I don't know why they're not. I think they have talent. We'll see how they do come Pac-12 play. But as of right now, they're 6-7, and they're going to have to win their conference tournament to get into March Madness. UCLA, I have completely just given up on. Every time I watch this team, I get more angry and more angry. I'm not a UCLA fan, but they are just bad. How, as a blue blood program, do you just go this bad? They're not losing to horrible teams, but they're just not winning any games that they should win. Mick Cronin has voiced his frustration. very publicly, and they've just got a lot of problems going on over there. I don't know what else to say. Michigan, Juwan Howard came back, and they've gone 1-3 since he got back. This team is just not very good. I didn't think they were going to be good preseason, but no Big Ten team should ever be 6-7 on the year and losing to McNeese on their home floor. This team is not very good. I am very worried about Michigan, UCLA, and USC. I don't see any of these teams having any chance of making the tournament unless they win their conference tourney at the end of the year. That is it for our Worry Wart meter for the week. Let's quickly talk about some of the games upcoming this week. We're filming this late on Monday night, so we're going to talk about Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and we will be back on Saturday morning to discuss some of the weekend games. Let's start on Tuesday. I'm just got the list pulled up right here. Some notable games. Purdue visits Maryland. This game will be on Peacock at 7 o'clock. Purdue is currently favored by 7.5. Kind of another spicy one. North Carolina, number 8 team in the country, visits Pitt. This game's on ESPN. North Carolina only favored by 3.5. So we said we moved Pitt into just strictly our considered category of our bubble watch. They have a good chance to pick up a key win here over North Carolina. Iowa visits Wisconsin. Wisconsin favored by 7.5. Wisconsin ranked 21st in the nation. Northwestern visits Illinois. Illinois favored by 5.5 without Terrence Shannon. We'll see how this game goes. Boo Booey will look to upset another top 10 team, Illinois ranked number 9. Syracuse takes on Duke at 9 o'clock. This game's on ESPN. Duke favored by 14.5 at home. Should be a great one. And a flying under the radar game at 10:30. New Mexico taking on number 13 Colorado State at Colorado State. Colorado State is favored by 3.5. This is a great Mountain West matchup. Two of the heavily favored teams to win that conference. On Wednesday, Seton Hall visits Providence in a Big East matchup at 6:30. Clemson visits Miami. Miami has not played a tough opponent in a while. They have been preparing for this game. Clemson and PJ Hall will go into Miami at 8 o'clock on Wednesday. This game's on ESPN. This is going to be a fun one to watch. On Thursday, only game really worth noting. I guess we'll talk about this one. James Madison, they're undefeated, 13-0. One of the teams we said has the best chance to finish the season undefeated. Take on Louisiana at Louisiana. Louisiana, not a bad team. They made the tournament last year. They are only 7-6 on the year, but James Madison looking to continue their undefeated stretch. This game's at 8 o'clock on ESPN+, but the game of Thursday is Colorado visiting number 10 Arizona at 9:30 on ESPN. Two teams, I think, out of the Pac-12 that will be in the tournament. For sure, Arizona. We have Colorado, and Colorado's resume hasn't been great, but they just picked up those 2 big wins last week. I expect them to be in the tournament. This should be a fun game to watch out of the 2 top teams in the Pac-12, excuse me. Finally, on Friday, UConn visits Butler in a spicy Big East matchup at 6:30. UConn number 4 in the nation as of the most recent AP polls, and this is not even the best game going on. The best game going on is a top 10 matchup. Number 9, Illinois visits number 1, Purdue at 8:30. Purdue will probably be favored by a lot in this game, just without the presence of Terrence Shannon, but that should be a fun one to watch at 8:30 on Fox Sports 1 on Friday. That is going to conclude our episode. Hopefully everyone enjoyed. We talked about a lot today. A lot of big games going on. If you're new here, please give us a follow on Twitter and Instagram. We post on there daily. We talk about everything on there at Bracket Science. Science has 2 S's to start the word. We're also on Facebook at Bracket Science, 2 words. We post the same stuff there. We post everything college basketball. We'll post games of the day, results of games. We talk about it every single day. Hopefully everyone enjoyed. Hopefully everyone had a great New Year. Thanks for tuning in. Everyone have a great 2024 and enjoy the rest of their week. See you later.